Okay, this is going to be part 3 of our reading of Romanism, Its Aims and Tendencies by L.W. Granger, 1854, picking up page 35 here. Through whose fear of losing Catholic votes and being subjected to the political guillotine is it that the miserable tool now occupying the gubernatorial chair of the state of New York acts in obedience? Let the following answer. The removal of Mr. Blunt from the office of Commissioner of Emigration at New York by Governor Seymour was at the instigation of Bishop Hughes. That must be John Dagger Hughes. The Mirror says, it cannot be said that he has been removed for the public good, for a better man has not taken his place, and from well-known facts in connection with Mr. Blunt and Catholicism, the inference is irresistible that a religious question alone has deposed him. In reference to the above appointment, we add the following from the Rochester American, evidently another newspaper. A short time ago, Governor Seymour expelled a civil officer from a position which he justly merited by his patriotism and the abilities which eminently fitted him for the post, and appointed in his stead a Roman Catholic. Now, what can be the motive for this? There was nothing in the man or in his political conduct which could possibly have a sufficient reason for his expulsion from a well-deserved office. Governor Seymour had no objection to him as a private citizen or as a public man, but he had objections to him merely as a Protestant, and solely on that ground expelled him from office. This unjust act shows him to be favorable to the Roman Catholic cause, or it shows him to be dishonest in his political course and anxious for the favor of Roman Catholics. We suppose he considers the Irish Catholics, or the Catholics of whatsoever race they may be, to be the predominant party in the state, and wishes to gain their favor by treason to his religion, and by silencing the voice of justice and conscience. The act is void of the least show of justice. The officer was competent to discharge the duties of his position. Governor Seymour never pretended that he was not. His political course was consistent with the principles of that party to which he adhered. His moral life was unimpeachable. Then what was the offense for which he was expelled? Oh, he was a Protestant. Black crime this most certainly is. Governor Seymour, a Roman Catholic? We will not pretend to decide whether he is or not. But most assuredly, this act seems to bespeak his inclinations to Catholicy. Well, and of course, we got Jesuit educated at Fordham University, Andrew Cuomo now, New York State Governor. But we are sure of this. If he is going to build his hope of political distinction and endowment upon Catholic votes and Catholic influence in this country, he will build his hopes upon an unsafe and perilous basis. We have no sympathy, no respect for a man, though he may be governor of the Empire State. That's interesting, I didn't know it was called that back in 1854. Who can condescend to sacrifice his principles of justice and right to the attainment of political distinction by upholding a kind of men who triumph and rejoice over the unjust disgrace of American citizens? American citizens, language fails us to express our indignation at such an outrage committed by the evil magistrate of any state in our Union. Low in the depths of political infamy must that man be sunk who will commit such an insult to the American people to gain the vote of a Roman Catholic. If this is the policy to be pursued hereafter, as it has heretofore been, how much longer will we, as American citizens, American-born citizens, submit to its decrees? Will not the people drive these base hirelings from the places of trust they now occupy, and transmit them into the hands of those in whom the people recognize no demagogue and political bloodhound? Yes, we say, the time will come, and that quickly too, when this political traffic will be done away with, even if it be at the sacrifice of much that Americans hold sacred and dear. Such being the case, is not the deposition too great an outrage for Protestantism or the Americans of this country to bear? Yet notwithstanding these transactions are of daily occurrence, we remain tranquil and supine. That the politics of New York State have been controlled for the last 25 years by the Roman Catholic vote, and a portion of that time through the influence of Bishop Hughes, is a fact too obvious to admit of contradiction. Scarcely an appointment is made in that city, New York, without the consultation of this Prince of Rome, the great democratic fountain of power. There's a book, I believe it was by Cooney, called The American Pope, which talks about, I believe it was Cardinal Spellman, Archbishop of New York City, I believe, at that time, and how he ruled America from New York. Upon this same principle are their charter elections conducted, and many of their best offices filled with his subjects. A residence of 6 days in that city has been deemed a sufficient length of time to subvert their interests at the ballot box. These Irish Catholics are, generally speaking, an ignorant, degraded, and superstitious class of beings. They are spewed out upon our shores like Jonah from the belly of the whale. They are utterly unable and incompetent to take care of themselves. They apply to the priest for assistance, but they are spurned from his presence. They are thrown upon the hospitality of Protestants, and if they are kindly treated and taken care of, their patrons and benefactors receive in return for kindness the insults not only of themselves, but from all the popish organs of this country. But oh, say our countrymen in return, it is poor, downtrodden Ireland. Yes, fellow citizens, it is poor, downtrodden Ireland. And that same Green Isle will soon say to you, as she already has said, I am holier than thou, quote unquote. Make way for liberty. This will be the siren song of the enemies of your liberties, when their children shall clip the wings of our noble bird and tear in pieces your national insignia. Romanism has demanded it. Unless you are aroused to a sense of duty, she will obtain it. It is poor Ireland, but why should she mourn over her condition? She has been stung, maddened, driven to desperation. She is polluted and festered with sores, until she stinks with corruption, robbed and bled by a God-accursed and eternally damned priesthood, until there is no virtue or intelligence in her people. They keep their subjects in complete subjection, and there is so little intelligence in them that if they should serve out of the full time required by the Constitution before they could become legal voters, they would even then be ignorant of our civil forms of government. Take an example, for instance. Ask the most intelligent of them upon the day of election for what principles they are contending. If they understand what measures are best calculated to promote the prosperity of a government so diametrically opposed to their own, and the only answer you will receive in return is, General Jackson and democracy, quote unquote. To this assertion many of you will bear me witness. Demagogues, deny it if you will. Who can wonder then that our elections are conducted with so much fraud and corruption? This is in 1854. since. Check out the documentary Hacking Democracy. I think it was 2005, 2006. HBO documentary. Also the book Vote Scam by the Collier brothers in the 90s. Through this intolerable Romish influence, which has been brought to bear against us, you are all witnesses to the fact that it has resulted not only in the election of bad and corrupt men to office, but in the defeat of some of the greatest statesmen in our country. And to what a sad state of things must a country like our own have degenerated when unable to control the affairs of their own government, when the minions of popery are sufficiently strong to erect a barrier in our progress and to say to us effectually, thus far can you come, but no further? As lamentable as such a condition of affairs may seem to you, upon that crisis we are now standing, and nothing will ever avoid the issue but a war of extermination. And just to add about, how we really are kept in the Dark Ages today by the papacy. Of course, you have the oil industry, which is run by the Knights of Malta. I believe it was John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust. He said he modeled after the Jesuits. And of course, we're stuck using gasoline-powered vehicles when I'm pretty sure there was a man who invented a water-powered vehicle. Then, of course, you have, our electrical grid, which I believe is run primarily on burning coal. But you've had men that have developed electromagnetic generators, literally like perpetual motion type machines that would produce their own electricity free of charge. So there's, we could be so much further along if we weren't kept in the Dark Ages. Which, Jesus said, by their fruit shall you know them, and, it's just Rome's history. This is what they do. Eric John Phelps recently talked about how he went into the office of some official in Pennsylvania. I can't remember what the exact title was. About trying to, and he had some patent attorney or lawyer or something with him, and he went in there to try to propose to him this notion of getting electromagnetic generators going, and working with the government to try to do it. And I guess Phelps basically got laughed out of his office and kicked out. In any case, when can we look for a different result? When will Roman Catholics act for themselves? Or when will they become so effectually naturalized as to become, in the true sense of the word, good and intelligent American citizens? It cannot be until they break away from that priestly authority, quote unquote, to which they are now so strongly attached, until they disinherit their belief in convents and monasteries, until they renounce forever their belief in the confessional doctrine of their church, concocted and established by the clergy for the sole purpose of committing a daring and outrageous crime upon the persons of those innocent lambs under their charge. Until they are sufficiently enlightened to believe and know that the Holy Bible is the sacred Word of God, and by its teachings they are to meet Him in judgment array, and that through Him is their only hope of salvation. In short, until they can point out satisfactorily the difference between the operations of a government guided by wisdom and simplicity and one that is positively suicidal to the best interests of the country of their adoption. When all this is done, then indeed will the influence of Romanism have but a feeble foundation to stand upon in its 19th century. While it is an admissible fact that the political effects of Romanism are palpably seen and experienced in the city and state of New York, the cities of Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Chicago, and St. Louis are under the same influences. The best offices of these cities are filled with foreigners, and the subordinate ones partially so. In Cincinnati, the government is composed of so many of this class of community that it is impossible to obtain judgment against a Roman Catholic. How are we in Detroit? The same influence is at work here under the sanction of the Church of Rome and its clergy, and the Catholic vote is considered an important consideration upon the day of election. They trespass, even here, upon your rights as citizen and freeman, and are endeavoring to wield from your grasp the very power which you now hold. In many cities where Romanism has made strongholds, the erected powerful fortifications for defense, it has assumed a dangerous form. Peaceable citizens whose views and opinions, perchance, are not in unison with their own, are knocked down in the streets and brutally murdered. They, the Irish, go armed with bowie knives and pistols, ready and eager to shoot down those who form associations for the preservation of American rights and interests. They receive insults and epithets, the most foul and malicious, as well as deeds of personal violence to their bodies. Let them go on, fellow citizens. Let them longer tantalize with Americans in this way they have pursued for the last 10 years, and young America, quote unquote, will kindle a fire in this country that will lay in ashes the spire of every cathedral that now glitters in the sunbeam. And the blackened walls will howl their mournful requiem over the desolated rubbish. That day is not far distant. The thunder which the American government will peal forth amid the clash of arms and the din of battle will shake popery in this country from its very center, and a war of extermination will completely annihilate their priest-ridden influence from our cities. Mark the prediction. And of course, Bible prophecy indicates America would indeed become a likeness to the Roman papacy, and so don't count on any of that. In the affairs of this government, Americans have all a common interest, and how to protect that government is their duty to study. The father of this country warned the people to beware of all foreign influence, no matter in what shape it might present itself. And when we read of such daring outrages being perpetrated upon American citizens abroad as the following, we say that it becomes the duty of this government to adopt a similar policy if needs be. Quote, "It is well known that England stands by this doctrine, once a subject, always a subject. Consequently, no matter how much one, born under her flag, forswears his allegiance and claims citizenship, England never acknowledges the right to do so. She can at any moment claim every naturalized citizen born within British possessions as hers, and if found in hostility, may treat all such as traitors. This aggressive pretension is being resurrected from its dormant state. Now that war has been declared against Russia, the English consul in Philadelphia announces that any British subject contributing to a loan raised on behalf of a sovereign at war with Great Britain will be guilty of treason. What will the American people say to this foreign interference with the rights and privileges of American citizens?" Unquote. It must rejoice the heart of every American to witness the many demonstrations now being made in different portions of the country to maintain their rights at all hazards. A slow but effectual cure is being perfected, which, if persevered in, and carried out in good faith and fidelity, will prove a most powerful auxiliary in routing from office thousands of Roman Catholics. The work, we say, has commenced, and as much as we may deprecate the necessity of such a course on the part of native-born Americans, quote unquote, still the times warrant the movement, and we have no doubt that it will be manfully sustained. In the language of Prairie the Third, Telegraph, quote, "The Know-Nothings, we believe, are but a reorganization of the Native Americans, imbued with the same spirit, actuated by the same motives, and combined on the same principles and for the same effect. It is not a matter of regret that after nearly three-fourths of a century's experience in the science of government and unparalleled success and progress under it in arts, arms, laws, liberty, national prosperity, and all that pertain to our well-tried peculiar institutions, the science of good government, Americans on their own soil should have cause to see a necessity thus to associate themselves in defense of these institutions against the threatening aspect of the hydra-headed monster of disorganization and anarchy so obviously depicted in the formidable front of foreign influence that marshals its thousands and 10,000s of those who have sought refuge on our shores from its home oppressions, but who, knowing nothing of true liberty, substitute licentiousness and its grossest characteristics in its place, and while affecting patriotism for the land of their adoption, clearly show their predilections for the lands of their nativities by their association in clannish squads, celebrating up with roarous fervor peculiar institutions of lands apparently abjured, but in the which all of their sympathies are centered." That was a long sentence. So evidently when they're referring here to these know-nothings as Native Americans, today we would obviously think, well, it must be talking about Indians. That's what we call Indians now. But he's evidently not. He's talking about Americans native to our ways in the Constitution and these sorts of things. So it just goes again to show you how the Jesuits redefine words so you lose history. If these un-Americanized foreigners can associate in honor of their respective abdicated countries as fatherland or our Ireland on American soil, Americans claim no more than the same right on their own soil or similar associations, and on far more justifiable and rational grounds to defend their most cherished institutions against the aggression of these foreigners who aggregate dictatorial attitudes and assume to teach what true Americanism is or should be, while they are endeavoring to trample its most sacred peculiarities under their unhallowed feet. Demagogues who encourage these aggressors and foreign clans for the sake of their easily purchased votes will doubtless exert themselves to unpopularize American associations and sink them, if they can, into the lowest contempt. This movement on the part of this association, as you will perceive, has created quite a sensation in Cincinnati on the part of the Roman Catholics, their priests being at the head of the business, as is generally the case. The Cincinnati Times gives some interesting notes on the state of things in that city. Since the attempt made there some time ago to gag American citizens and keep them from the polls, there have been keen eyes searching through the city to discover where the evil was rooted. It is now reported that the fountain of all Cincinnati mischief and misrule has been discovered, and that stringent measures will be adopted to put an end to the corrupt influences which have been at work. Of course, as yet, nobody knows nothing how it is to be accomplished, but the faith is fully entertained by all well posted in the city affairs. The Times, in speaking of the rumors circulated upon pungent articles such as Bowie knives and pistols, etc., says, quote, 2 or 3 weeks ago the public was frightened from its propriety by a statement that at Canton, in this state, a cask had arrived at the station marked with the single word Canton for direction. The strange address led to an examination of the contents, which were found to be firearms and bowie knives. It was called for and taken away by a Catholic priest. The whole of the statement was afterwards contradicted. Mr. Keplinger, the ticket and freight agent at the depot, denied that any such cask had been received or claimed by a Catholic priest. The Ravenna Democrat of Wednesday intimates that the whole denial is a quibble. It was not a cask, but a box that contained the weapons. A correspondent, whose name the editor says he is ready to give, writes, "The box was claimed and carried away in broad daylight by a Catholic priest, and since that time a small iron cannon has been received at the station with the same suspicious mark, and was claimed and carried away by the Catholic priest. The box was received, and it is folly for anyone to attempt to deny it. What the object is, I am as ignorant as your readers. Such implements are not usually used in the worship of God. What a minister of Jesus Christ could want with such articles is a question I cannot solve," unquote. The Times adds, quote, Does Archbishop of Purcell or any of his friends, followers, or acquaintances in the city or elsewhere, or anybody else know anything of the casting of, say, 6 small octagon-shaped cannon or small cannon of any shape the present year at a foundry at or near the head of Broadway in Cincinnati, say in the vicinity of Gardner's Iron Foundry, or at any other place? Such has been the talk for some time, but we have refrained from giving publicity to the allegations that they were ordered, were made, and are to be used for the protection of our most holy religion here and elsewhere. Will the Catholic Telegraph or anybody else give us their affidavit for or against the truth of this rumor? Also, whether similar doings have taken place on Race Street between 4th and 5th Streets, or in that neighborhood in this city, and still further, whether a cask or casks, box or boxes of revolvers and other quick and conclusive arguments have been received the present year at or near the Catholic Cathedral, which, having been accidentally exposed, were sent to a neighboring armory? And further, whether, as is alleged by a young mechanic recently at work on the St. Xavier premises, there are a good many muskets stored there, and for what? And Francis Xavier was a co-founder of the Jesuit order. I'm not sure if this is a Jesuit premise or not here in Cincinnati. I know Francis Xavier University in Canada is a Jesuit college. I would assume this probably is, but in any case. And for what? The Times may well add, to shoot down American citizens who profess to belong to an American Association of Freemen? The box claimed and removed by a Roman Catholic priest! Firearms and bowie knives to be used by a Roman Catholic priest and subjects to murder and massacre American citizens, not only in the silent hours of the night, but in open daylight. And just to interject, this may sound crazy in our day and age, having forgotten the history of Rome. Just remember the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. No, that's common history. No one denies what took place. It's happened before. And for what? Not for attacking or misusing them, not for encroaching upon their rights as adopted citizens, not by making unnecessary demands upon them in any shape or form, but simply for being attached to an association of American freemen. Freeman is a biblical term. Talks about the Lord's free man in the Bible, King James Bible anyways. What think you of this? It is not confined to Cincinnati, Washington, and Philadelphia alone, but wherever such an organization is in progress. Scarcely has the indignation of the people subsided before the notes of discord again come pealing in our ears to the thundertones that St. Louis is in arms. What cause has wrought this change among her quiet and law-abiding citizens? What cause has instigated her people to seek revenge, to fire up their patriotism with indignation, feeling no security for themselves or their families, save under the protection of martial law and military discipline? And I think that's what they want today. They want to create lawlessness to the point that the American citizens will be begging for martial law. Military dictatorship, which is what we have today. Emergency Banking Relief Act, Trading with the Enemy Acts, Proclamations 2039-2040 of FDR 1933, been under temporary military emergency government ever since. Why those glittering bayonets and waving plumes, the rolling drum, the deep shrill fife? Why is it that the moment the fatal stab is given in the breast of an American citizen, that business becomes suspended and all rush to the scene of combat? Ah, my countrymen, I need not tell you. Insult not Boston by asking her if she will ever forget that fatal night to her city, the 5th of March, 1770. The horrors of that dreadful night are but too deeply impressed on the hearts of her people, as language is too feeble to paint the emotion of their souls when their streets were stained with the blood of their brethren, when their ears were wounded with the groans of the dying, when their houses were wrapped in flames, their beauteous virgins exposed to all the insolence of unbridled passion, and their virtuous wives falling sacrificed to worse than brutal violence, so have the inhabitants of St. Louis sufficient cause for revenge. And just to show how counter-reformed we've been as a people, I don't know what happened on March 5, 1770. Is that the Boston Massacre? Let's look it up. Yep, Boston Massacre. Boston Massacre was a confrontation on March 5, 1770, in which British soldiers shot and killed several people while being harassed by a mob in Boston. The event was heavily publicized by leading patriots such as Paul Revere and Sam Adams. So, okay. The horrors... Oh, we read that. Let us then, in order that we may not be accused of presenting to the reader a one-sided issue of this deeply and much to be regretted drama, which has so recently transpired in that city, give the details as we find them in the public prints of the day. It appears that the new American organization of Know-Nothings assembled on the evening previous to their late election to adopt a ticket for a member of Congress. It will also be observed that in making other selections, they excluded every Catholic as well as everyone with foreign blood in his veins from receiving a nomination. The day of election having arrived, and the Roman Catholics, stung with revenge at the course pursued by this American order, commenced their assaults upon the people by plunging a knife into the bowels of an American citizen. The following is but a skeleton sketch of the whole transaction. Quote, the difficulty commenced in the Fourth Ward, and was occasioned by an Irishman stabbing an American. This was the signal for a general attack which was commenced upon the Irish doggeries on Mayor and Green Streets, and Washington Avenue, and on the whole front of the levee, from Cherry Street to below Locust, were more or less injured. The crowd supplied themselves with axes and other implements of the sort from the steamboats at the wharf, and with them beat in the shutters and smashed the counters and everything that would yield to blows. On the levee between Cherry and Locust, there are only 1 or 2 houses at most that do not bear disastrous marks of the conflict. We could not learn with certainty of one death. It is rumored that there are 4 or 5 killed. From the reports rife on the spot, and from the facts that hundreds of discharges were heard during the row which raged a good 2 hours in all its fury, and has continued at the intervals thus far during the night, it is fair to presume that the number of wounded is large. Who was taught this history? I was never taught any of this. I wonder why. The greatest excitement prevails at the time of writing. The office of the Anzeiger, Anzeiger, has already been once attacked with stones, and as we write, crowds are rushing down 3rd Street in the direction, shouting, "Bornstein, Bornstein." The military are under arms and on the alert. The editor of the Democrat says, "It is utterly impossible to estimate the number of persons wounded in the whole affair, or even to say how many have been killed. We saw at least 20 men lying bleeding and wounded so severely that they were insensible, their faces cut most horribly and skulls smashed, and some appearing perfectly dead. And we have learned of 3 men certainly dead, and of 5 or 6 more who are thought to be dead at this time from wounds received." At a late hour, when it was deemed safe for persons to pass along the riotous district, we turned out for the purpose of procuring a list of the houses and their location, but found such a multitude on the streets named that we were compelled to give it up for a more seasonable hour. At a rough estimate, there are not less than 60 houses destroyed. All this, besides the murder and maiming, was the work of but a few hours. Okay, we got to take a pause and try to look this up. I don't think the author mentioned the date. St. Louis riots, 1854, sounded like the date of the publication. Let's see. Okay, I see it here on Wikipedia as the Know Nothing riot. Has been used to refer to a number of political uprisings of the native. So they're blaming it here on the native. They're blaming it on these Protestants that were seeking to protest the. Wow. Yeah. So this is Vatipedia, as Johnny Cerrucci calls it. Supposedly user edited. The term Know Nothing riot has been used to refer to a number of political uprisings of the nativist American Know Nothing Party in the United States of America during the mid-19th century. These anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic protests culminated into riots in Philadelphia in 1844, St. Louis, 1854, Cincinnati and Louisville in 1855, Baltimore, 1856, Washington, D.C. and New York in 1857, and New Orleans in 1858. Holy smokes. So this was pretty serious. How fascinating that it's being blamed on these Protestants here. This guy has made some statements that seem to indicate he's okay with violence, but at the same time, this news article we just read clearly implicated the Irish Catholics as being the ones that started it all. So, fellow countrymen, when these outrages will have an end, God only knows. How can we look upon the desolating scene around us without being fully impressed with the thought that it must lead eventually to a fearful reaction. Sounds like he didn't want a reaction. And again, so how come we weren't taught this history? I wonder how many Americans have heard of the Know Nothing riots, as they're evidently called now. We certainly cannot, with such examples before our eyes, suffer our liberties to be ravished from us by lawless force, or cajoled away by flattery or fraud. None but those who see a just value upon the blessings of liberty are worthy to enjoy her. Your illustrious fathers were her zealous votaries. When the blasting frowns of tyranny drove her from public view, they clasped her in their arms, they cherished her in their generous bosoms, they brought her safe over the rough ocean, and fixed her seat in this then dreary wilderness. In her defense, the boldly encountered the most alarming dangers. Neither the ravenous beasts that ranged the woods for prey, nor the more furious savages of the wilderness could damp their ardor. While with one hand they broke the stubborn glebe, with the other they grasped their weapons, ever ready to protect her from danger. Yeah, according to that account, if these American citizens, patriotic, were armed, they wouldn't have had there wouldn't have been so many killed and with their skulls smashed in, probably. They would have defended themselves, so I don't know. Now is the time to grasp your weapons, American freemen. Blood has been shed in your midst. Vengeance is the watchword. Justice, stern and unalterable justice, has been demanded, but ignominiously denied you. In the language of Warren, the voice of your father's blood cries to you from the ground, my sons, scorn to be slaves. And so I don't know if this guy is just deceived and ignorant, advocating violence in response, or if he's literally like a Jesuit coadjutor himself, seeking to create revolution and war, because that's what the Jesuits do. Like, they'll foment the initial wrong thing, and then they'll also stir up the other side that was wronged to try to get them to go to extreme, to create war, so they can put themselves on top. So the Civil War was evidently from 1861 to 1865. I know Chiniquy, quoting Abraham Lincoln in his 50 Years in the Church of Rome, says that it was basically a religious war. And if the American people realized that the Catholic Church was behind it, then the Civil War would have taken on like a tenfold brutal factor, as all religious wars do. So who knows? But in any case, carrying on. In vain we meet the frowns of tyrants. In vain we cross the boisterous ocean, found a new world, and prepared it for the happy residence of liberty. See, that's the thing. Like, if we go by our emotions instead of the Bible, it's very easy to see how a true patriot could be inclined to these type of sentiments of war and vengeance, and that they had to protect their rights, because after all, the Second Amendment and these sorts of things. So it is also possible that this author was just deceived as to the appropriate response, which should have been prayer and repentance as a people. Then God would straighten out the enemies, in my opinion. In vain we toil, in vain we fought, we bled in vain. If you, our offspring, want valor to repel the assaults of her invaders. How it causes the blood to boil in our veins as we witness from day to day the lamp of liberty flickering in its socket and expiring upon the altars once dedicated to freedom. O American freemen, let it be so no longer. If the war is inevitable, let it come. Americans must conquer, or Rome's deluded followers. I love the quote from the Ten Commandments film with Charleston Heston, where when God calls Moses to go to Egypt, Joshua says, "All right, I'll go get the swords." And Moses is like, "It's not by the sword, but by the shepherd's staff that this war will be won." Amen. Spirit of God. Tyranny and these things are a judgment of God for our sins. Extenuate the matter no longer. American institutions must and will survive the shock, or convents, monasteries, and cathedrals must lay low in unhallowed ashes, while the rotten and polluted carcass of every Roman Catholic bishop and priest within our borders will learn the salutary lesson taught by American freemen, too, that Rome, the city of the vile and mother of abominations, Revelation 17, can never establish her decrees upon 1 inch of soil dedicated to the American government. Let her persevere in her further depredations upon our institutions. Let her spill a few more drops of American blood for our soil to drink. Let her plant a few more cannon. Let her plant a few more cannon in our midst by these sanctimonious rascals, the priests. Let these unpunished butchers, these arrogant knaves, arm their subjects with bowie knives and firearms to murder American citizens, trample underfoot the Protestant Bible, and fire our schoolhouses, and the American people will whet their swords, but not in vain, bidding their burnished steel to drink deep of the blood of their country's invaders. Bitter will that day be for Rome and its vile priesthood in that evil hour. The Boston Pilot manifests a vindictive spirit towards this new organization and predicts the fearful calamity which will befall Romanism. It says, "An eminent American statesman, one of the pillars of the Democratic Party, when he heard that this new party was formed, observed that it was the most dangerous organization ever established in America. It is certain that the party is founded on a basis which, however apparently American it may be, is diametrically opposed to the fundamental principles which underlie American institutions. It is the most unconstitutional party yet formed in the country, and hence, if it triumphs in the approaching elections, its triumph will be brief. In this respect, if it goes beyond the Free Soil Party, which also rests upon the unconstitutional basis, both parties will owe their temporary success to the stronger and less honorable passions of men. In other words, communities of men are periodically seized with fits of madness, as animals are, and during the mad fit they say and do things which they are afterwards heartily ashamed. The good sense of the nation will at no distant day reject these unconstitutional parties, and what with free soil and know-nothing riots, our enemies are laboring in our cause, for their lawless actions will open the eyes of the nation sooner than they would otherwise be open. As we said, the know-nothing organization is now the most aristocratic and the most formidable native sect. There are several others, the most promising of which is the Order of the United Americans. The Know-Nothings, as we have said, exclude men who are not of pure American blood, yet Protestant and infidel foreigners, and above all the German infidel and Irish Orangemen, who are more numerous than people suppose, make most excellent natives. Their hatred of Catholicity exceeds even that of the Know-Nothings. And so they are allies whose services cannot be spared. So that's the Orangemen, evidently. And it sounds like German non-Christian. Why should not Romanism feel the sting of the adder and raise its hydra-headed monster as it sees itself reeling before the voice of the people? The following will show the strength and position which the new organization now holds in the United States. The New York Herald, speculating the influence of the Know-Nothings at the presidential election, says the following are the principal states having populous cities where Native American organizations may be expected to take place and thus influence the electoral votes at the next election. Massachusetts, chief cities, Boston and Lowell, 13 votes. Maine, Portland, Bangor, etc., 8. Rhode Island, Providence, etc., 4. Connecticut, Hartford, New Haven, etc., 6. New York, Brooklyn, 35. New Jersey, Newark, Camden, 7. Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, etc., 27. Delaware, Wilmington, etc., 3. Maryland, Baltimore, etc., 8. Louisiana, New Orleans, etc., 6. Ohio, Cincinnati, etc., 25. Votes total 142. The whole number of the electoral votes of the 31 states is 296, making 146 necessary to a choice. It will therefore require but little additional force to the balance of the power votes which the Know-Nothings may hold at the next presidential election to enable them to carry their points. The Boston Bee, in remarking upon the proposals of this new organization, says, the unexpected success of the Know-Nothings and the prospect of their preserving the country from the clutches of the Pope have seriously alarmed the Romish propaganda, who, finding they miscalculated their strength and made too early a movement, are now attempting with Jesuitical skill to throw dust into the people's eyes. It is well known that the present American movement was called into being the threatening. So this quote, Jesuitical skill, was in this Boston Bee. They mentioned that, which sounds like a local newspaper there. But I think that's the first time the Jesuits have been mentioned at all in this book so far. It is well known that the present American movement was called into being through the threatenings, gloryings, and boastings of accredited Catholic organs, and that it is against Catholicism as the unswerving foe of republicanism that it is mainly directed. The Irish Protestants, together with the English, Italians, and Germans who have taken up their abode among us, understand this, and with great good sense acquiesce, knowing well that under the Constitution no line can be drawn to meet the case but nativity. The Germans, who form a large foreign element in the country, are particularly content. They declare through their ornals, that the Know-Nothings are very good-natured, well-meaning fellows, and that they had rather by far be under the rule of the native than the Jesuit. The point at issue, then, being not so much nativism and foreignism as Catholicism, the Romanists very naturally desire to avert the gaze the public have fixed upon them, and accordingly have suppressed the Shepherd of the Valley together with one or two more journals which have made themselves most obnoxious. They have likewise deputed the American renegade Orestes A. Bronson, Brownnson, to get up a sham fight with his foreign brethren, hoping under cover of the smoke, dust, and noise thus created to be able to withdraw the regular papal forces from the public ken, and so far prevent and so far for the present confine them as heretofore undermining operations, to undermining operations. But let not the lookers on be deceived by this, or the vigor with which the engagement is carried on. The pent-up jealousy and hate which the American and foreign Romish priesthood and scribblers in this country have entertained for each other will no doubt exhibit itself in bitter fury. But though many hearty thwacks be given with right good will, no love of America or American institutions will nerve an arm on either side, and a word from the Vatican will at any moment still the tumult and unite the two forces against their common enemy. Almost sounds like the author of this Boston Bee is saying that the Civil War is being created to unite Protestants and Catholics under the enemies of the Christian religion. Perhaps. Which I think is definitely still an agenda. Continuing on. Another mighty reason for this movement is evident. A short time since the Boston pilot announced that the stock of Irish Catholics at home was getting low, and that the German immigration, most of which was anti-Catholic, would soon predominate, and for this reason it might be politic shortly to alter or abolish the naturalization laws. Every good son of the church should hurry up and get his naturalization papers. It is not strange, then, that Brownson should assist to hoist the banner of nativism, or the Boston pilot approve the act. But the lover of liberty, whether born on this land or any other, remember that the Catholic is bound to serve his church before his country, and that the Romish Church favors no progress except that which tends to strengthen and consolidate its own power. And so that's where we are going to cut off this reading. That is the end of the quote from the Boston Bee. And next we will hear, when we pick up, the author's response to the first article that seemed to cast the know-nothings in a negative light, possibly for legitimate reasons, but we'll hear how the author responds nonetheless.